And we're live.
Hello and welcome to another live demonstration. Today's is a bit of a spooky one. It's the 31st of October. So not only is it the end of Inktober, where you've been challenged to produce an ink piece either daily, weekly, monthly, or just to have fun and practice, it's also Halloween. So I think there might be some spooky goings on. So to couple the end of Inktober, so I've done 4 pieces throughout the month, and this is my final piece. I'm using ink. I'm going to use the Elegant Writer. Now this is traditionally a calligraphy pen with a chiselled end, but what's really nice about it is the way that the ink splits when you add water. So it's a really useful drawing tool. So coupling with a water brush, you've actually, and I'll show you how much tones and values and how much fun you can have with such simple tools. So Halloween, trying to think of a subject, and this subject is one I was looking at doing anyway, and I thought about doing it in acrylic, but it's just totally suitable for Halloween. And bats are, they're with Halloween and you get bats and pumpkins, but bats, from all the information I've been reading, are really truly fascinating creatures, and they're not spooky or scary. They're actually really wonderful and very useful. There's over 1,000 species, 17 of which are in the UK, and because they're insect eaters, they can help rid the environment of insects. And they eat so much in a night that they're actually really useful, and obviously their droppings are really useful for fertilising. And so on the whole, these so-called scary animals are actually really useful, and they're not that scary at all. Right, so I'm going to be drawing these both 2 bats, which I think were taken, I'm not sure where they were taken, but it's my own images. And they were huddled in a shelter, so it would be at a zoo, I would think. And bats can live on their own. They can live in colonies. And they're known for living in caves and dark places, trees. And I think this is where they get some of their bad reputation from. Plus, they're nocturnal, so they fly at night. What's interesting is that the bats are the only mammal which can fully fly. So there are other mammals which glide, but the bat is the only mammal that has full flight, so it can flap its wings and can fly around looking for insects. I'm just looking at the original just so I can put some colour down. And with the Elegant Writers, you don't need a lot of pigment down. So I'm going to be a little bit careful so I don't over colour. And it's the wonderful properties when you add water, which I'm looking for, because it splits into blues and pinks, and that only happens if you've got plenty of water. Just dropping a bit on there, because it really will bring out the pink. But you can see how little you actually need. I'm just using what I've got on my brush for a slightly darker area, lighter area, sorry. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a bit of the ink down and then move around the page, because even though this is water soluble once dry, I find it much easier to move once it's put on straight away. So if I do put the water on straight away I'm able to get the quality I'm looking for. But you can see how easy this is and how easy it is just to pick up the colour from a small mark. Just suggesting fur on the back here. And I can go back in and alter and add to once it's dried. So I'm going to work my way around, looking at these darkest areas inside, which the wing is made up of. These here are actually their fingers, and they've got very strong claws at the end. So the whole wing made up with a skin layered around what are elongated fingers. Just trying to see and visualise the dark areas for now. That one goes in there. And so, what do I know about bats? I know that the biggest bat is the fruit bat, and I have seen these in Australia, and they are very noisy, very quarrelsome. You see them coming in to roost. It's just constant bickering and arguing between them. It's really quite noisy. And they can be about, I thought it was about a metre, maybe it was 2, but the smallest is as big as your thumbnail, which is the bumblebee bat from Thailand, and that's a tiny little bat. So they feed on fish. Some will feed on fish, some will feed on fruit, many will feed on insects, which, like I said at the beginning, makes them a really useful animal to have around, because they will rid you of pesky mosquitoes or other flying insects which you don't want around. And very misunderstood from what I was reading. I can see the pink coming out on that. Right, let me. So another way I use this is I put a bit of the ink onto a china palette and I can pick up. That gives me a little bit more control and not too much ink. So this bit in there. And like I say, I can go back. The water brush is great. It gives a very even, constant flow of water, but sometimes I want it to be a little bit wetter, especially with the pen, because that's when it will bring out the tones and values. So I will drop a little bit of water onto my palette. Just trying to make sense of my lines. So relying heavily on the original. Looking at the shape and the values. Okay, so I I think the eyes caught the camera, so it's got a bit of red eye, nose. And you'll see I often do a dot dash kind of drawing technique. Some areas I may do a solid line, but other areas I like to do this dotting and dashing because it gives me a little bit more control over how much ink's there. If I put it on in one solid line, which I may do in some areas, i.e. on the cave wall, it gives me too much pigment. So, let's go back in here. It's drying. I'm using it on a Bockingford 425, mainly because I had a piece hanging around, but it's the water that will affect the paper. So I don't want it to go crinkly and cockly because I'm going to be using quite a lot of water. So this is why I've chosen a heavier weight watercolour paper. But it's a pen, it will go on any surface. What will affect it is the water. That's why I've chosen a paper that I know will take the water. Using the different sides of the pen, so the chisel end I will use if I want a big mark, and then just turning it round to pick up the narrow end. See what I can pick up here. Okay, see how little you really need. And like I say, the brush gives a constant amount of water, which is nice, but sometimes you just want to flood. Flooding works really well with this. It must be a bit darker to make sure I've got plenty of pigment. This, I think, is... Okay, there's a claw. You can see that there, and that's on that wing which is folding down here. Let's take some of the black down, let's darken it. And you would think a couple of tools like this, it would be very quick. It's easy, it's not, you know, you don't have to keep thinking of lots of colour. You are thinking of tonal value, so it's a really good exercise. But you can see how much detail, or little, that you can achieve with just a few tools. And I'm always keen on keeping it simple, because I think sometimes people overthink, especially when you're faced with a lot of colour. If you're faced with a lot of colour, it can be really difficult to decide what you want to achieve, what's the right colour. The thing I get asked most is what colour do I use for this? And that's actually quite a difficult question, because it's difficult to say, because people see colour very differently. It is something that you need to practice and learn. Whereas this kind of drawing, or painting I suppose, just allows you to look at the values and the tonal values, which again, if you're faced with colour, you don't want to be thinking about tonal values as well, especially when you're starting out. So little steps, and you learn something from each little step. So just put some, I'm going to pick up some of the ink on the palette because I want to use the tip of this brush and just suggest fur, so it's a different kind of mark. Just using what I've got either on my brush or what I'm catching. I do want the eye to bleed a little bit, just so it's not so solid. Right, ear. Right, I think I need a little bit more shadow here. That's a bit too light. So looking at your values, going back, revisiting. I'll come back to that one and I'll work on this one. So this wing, I think it's bent round here. Like that. Now, there are 3 species of vampire bat. So there are bats which drink blood. And to be honest, from what I've read, this is not as scary as you think. Majority, they will drink from a sleeping animal, a cow, a sheep, some from fish. So there are only 3 types of vampire bat, which is really apt being Halloween. So we'll go on to the facts about vampire bats rather than the scary details. One thing that can be a problem with vampire bats is that they can carry diseases. So if they bite, they can spread rabies. But again, on the whole, vampire bats aren't as scary as they're made to be in films and popular culture. They're actually, again, a really wonderful creature. They are, from what I read, the females are the only bats that will, if a parent bat dies, they will take on the baby. So they actively pick up and adopt another bat's baby if that bat has died. The vampire bats need to eat about half of their body weight a night in blood. And if they don't do that for 2 days, they can die. And what's also interesting is the females will, if a bat hasn't eaten, can regurgitate blood that they've eaten and can feed another bat, which, you know, you see these as horrible creatures that just fly around at night terrorizing. They actually don't. They think they've developed from fruit-eating bats. So those sharp teeth were used to pierce the skin of the fruit, and they've just adapted to being solely, these 3 bats are solely reliant on blood, and that is very unusual in the animal kingdom. I think these vampire bats are the only mammal or animal that is solely reliant on hemoglobin, which again makes them unique in the animal world. Look at those pinks. And I've been a bit lighter this time because I want to bring it out. So go back in. What's difficult is while it's still wet, I don't want to put too much pigment down. What else do I know about bats? The vampire bats live in, I think, the Americas, South America mostly. And the animal that's been bitten doesn't even notice. It can be, they're so fine and so sharp that a vampire bat can crawl in, because these are the only bats that can walk and crawl. All the other bats don't have that ability if they're on the ground. whereas vampire bats do. So they can crawl, and they're attracted to the animal's heat. So they're using a thermal location, and they locate a heat source, and they'll crawl to it or jump to it, and they'll bite the animal, and the animal most of the time will not even notice. This is a sleeping animal and won't even notice it's been bitten because it's such a fine, sharp teeth. And they'll bite, and they won't suck blood like you assume. They actually lap it up with their tongues, but they can take half of their body weight. But on the whole, unless the bat is diseased, which unfortunately they can be with rabies, there's no ill effects to the animal. And the other bats, like I say, are really, really useful for keeping the populations of insects at bay, because they eat and consume millions in a night. Did I tell you the names of the vampire bats? I don't think I did. Well, you've got the common, right. So the common vampire bat. You've got the hairy-legged, and you've got the white-winged. So obviously when people were making up or putting names to these bats, they didn't have much imagination and just took their characteristics. I think the hairy-legged was funny. Right, that's a wing done. I'm going to work this way round. I think the wing comes down here, attaches to the leg. And so, like I say, these are the only mammal which have the ability to fly. Other animals have the ability to glide, but mammals that fly, these are the only. And they're not the vermin that people see them as I've explained before. They actually have really useful tasks in the environment. Again, I think the wing comes here. This isn't a totally clear image, so I'm having to think about what it's trying to tell me. So this claw, which they have amazingly sharp claws and strong feet to enable them to hang upside down, must be gripping somewhere. Okay. And this is the solid line that I don't always use, but I want it to be solid just there because I want it much more colour. Then I'll go back to the dash and light touch. Again, I'm not putting too much on before I go in and add the water, because like I say, I like it to be a little bit wet. It's not yet cured. Curing is slightly different to drying, and you will know that if you use a permanent pen. Drying is when it is dry on the paper, but it doesn't always mean it's cured. Curing means, especially with a waterproof pen, you have that property of total waterproofness, but it needs to have cured. So sometimes you need a few extra minutes, and I'm not talking hours, I'm talking a few extra minutes than you would expect to get the permanence of the pen. Now, I know I can reactivate this because it's water soluble throughout, but if I do it straight away, it's much easier to move. I need a little bit of different value there. It's not quite working. I'll come back to that. So I'm going to again, take it from the palette, pick up and create the fur-like qualities. And just think how easy this is if you take it on location. Instead of taking all your paints and all your water, just pick up a pen. Now in a restaurant, using a napkin or any other, or your sketchbook if you're prepared, which I'm not always that prepared. And look at all the tonal values and movement and qualities you can actually get with just these. So light, portable, and fun. Okay. Didn't finish down here. And I'll continue to go in and pick up where I see I need more value. But for the minute, I'm just getting the texture of fur. And this is where the water brush is really good, because like I've said, it gives you a nice flow of water, but it's not very flooding unless I squeeze the barrel. But that gives me that ability to get this lovely dry brush quality, because I can skip on the paper. I want that to be. What I'm trying to do is not only look at tone of value but texture, and I want to pick up the different texture, and you'll see here with the fur, because it's a mammal, and they have fur bodies, and the skin, it's much smoother, and I want to kind of show that with just the brush marks. Right, let's move up. Darker under here. So this is obviously a finger. Comes around here. You can see the bone. And then a really strong claw here. So you can see that you've got a hook at the end here of the wing and really strong claws on their feet. I'm just jumping around because I keep seeing areas I want to revisit, but I'm not going to. I need to concentrate on one bit at a time, or I will lose all the detail that I may not have put down with a pencil. So I'm relying on the original just to make sure that I put things in the right place and things make sense, like the folds. And I will have to change this and go back in, but that's just my mind moving around quickly. Just work on one area and move on. That's what I need to, right, nearly. So that area is actually the wall behind it, so it's going to be much darker, or I might leave it lighter, but it's not actually part of these folds. It's maybe a bit wet to pick up. Put the ink down. Yeah, still a bit wet. So it is easier if I move on to areas which are drying and maybe darken up. Look at that, look how strong you can get. Again, I don't want to over strengthen, because I love these qualities. The pinks and the blues, but it does need to have a little bit more depth. Same down here, it's a bit too light. pour that ink in. So you can work slowly and you can build up your values. Right, let's have a look here. Just squeezing the barrel of the water pen just to make it flow a little bit more. So it brings more water out than I would normally use. So I'm looking here. This must be, I can see there. So this is fur. So this is the body. And it comes around here. So that's an elbow or some kind of bend. Just moving my pen or brush very quickly over the surface gets these lovely marks, and you don't always know what it's going to look like until it starts to dry. Work quite quickly like this and pick up some of the ink that's already on there. Right. Looking at the direction of the fur, as with any animal, it's important that I'm looking at which direction the fur goes, and it's going down the back this way. Just got a little lighter area in the back there. Some of it you kind of re-look, rejudge and think about as you go on. So you're not totally dependent on the original, because you may want to add a little bit more tonal value. And this is where you're in charge of your own painting. As long as the details like the nose, the eye and the wings attached, I think a lot of it is you can have fun with your marks. Just seeing these darker areas here under the head, and look how subtle you can get from this one pen. Right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a short break. The reason is I need to walk away for the minute I get, and then come back with fresh eyes and refocus on areas that I need to either work on or don't work on, and then areas I need to finish. So join me in a moment.
Hi, I'm Ali Hargreaves and I'm here to introduce you to Ready Steady Paint. This is a monthly art subscription box for 6 to 11-year-olds. Ready Steady Paint has been designed by today's artists to support, develop and encourage those of tomorrow. I have had over 20 years experience as a primary school teacher. I've worked as an artist in residence in a number of primary schools, and I'm also a mum. I've seen how creative subjects, especially art, has declined over the years and has been taught less and less in the educational system. We feel very passionate about filling in this artistic void. We're so excited to share the experience with you and your children. We hope to give children a chance to produce beautiful pieces of art with high quality materials. Following a hand-curated syllabus, each month subscribed children will receive a box full of high-quality artistic goodies in the post. Using these materials, they'll be able to follow the online tutorials delivered by me and access through the Ready Steady Paint website. All this will be conveniently delivered to your door at an affordable cost. There is so much to learn and so many wonderful activities to complete and rewards to gain. So what are you waiting for? Join us on this journey of artistic fun and discovery.
And we're back.
Hello and welcome back. And it is always a useful exercise to walk away. Don't try and complete things in one go, because you get overwhelmed or over-focused. It's easy to walk away, come back, and then it's a quick review of where you need to be and what you need to do. And I think that's something which need to learn to do, and actually give yourself a break, because it's very valuable. And rather than make your drawing last longer or to have to spend more time on your drawing, it will actually probably make your work easier, because you'll be able to focus and see areas that you've done much easier if you've walked away and come back with fresh eyes. But all artists will go, just finish, no, a little bit more, finish, no. And I'm just as bad for that. Luckily, I only have a short time, so I have to set my own time limits. And again, that's another exercise. Do things, set a time limit on what you're doing. Do things very quickly, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And you'll be surprised how much you can get done when you're not focused on, you're not over-focused, you're just getting things down quickly, and you can make some really nice marks and do some nice sketches. And if you're out on location, you need to get things down quickly, because animals, people, they don't hang around for you just to sketch. Right. Need to maybe put a little bit more solid line on here. So you can see how I can just pick the colour up. So the eyes. So another myth about bats is that they can't see at night. They are perfectly capable of seeing. They have good eyesight. But they use echolocation to, fly around. So they send out a blip or a beep, or and if it bounces back, they know there's an obstacle in the way. If it doesn't, they know they're okay to fly. I know I've got bats in my garden, and you can hear them, and they fly in a figure of 8. The myth that they will fly at you and get tangled in your hair, the chances are quite slim, because they are very used to flying at night, and they use this echolocation to know whether it's safe to fly or not. I think, from what I read, that bats are actually quite an old, established species. So I think it was 28 million years old fossil has been found of bats, which, means they've been around a long time and very adapted to the environment. I didn't know there were 17 species in the UK. That was a surprise, because you know about a couple of them, but not 17 species. And when there's over, I think 1,200 or 1,000 to 1,200 species of bat, and they're quite a prolific species. They only have one baby a season, and a lot of those species are endangered because of environmental factors, and only having one baby doesn't give them a big bank of new bats in a colony. Just working this way because this is where it's darkest. Do want the eye to bleed a little bit, just so I get a little bit, it's not as harsh, and using that colour to go backwards. And using this. This is a nice, I think this might be the small of the water brushes from the SAA. I'm just trying to remember to leave light areas. It's easier to darken, but it's more difficult to lighten. So just making sure I'm not over keen with my brush and put too much dark on. Okay. I'm going to put them in an environment just use the brush to catch the edge of this watercolour paper, create some of the crevices and texture. And I need to darken here because this is obviously an overhang, which is pushed back, making it darker behind. Now I may still keep those lines. Depends on the paper how well the pen, the ink moves, and you may find on some papers you'll get lines still left. So as with anything, it is worth testing. I know this is a watercolour paper, it's a Bockingford, so I'm familiar with that paper, and I'm happy with the way it moves. You'll see there's still some lines which I'm not overly concerned about. Put a lot of pigment down this time so that I'm able to really darken the background there. And I can come back in if it's not dark enough. Need some more dark here, using the edge. I think this pen might be a little on the way out because I use them so often. Chances are it's pretty much used up, but it's nice when they dry up like so. Even though this pen is not giving me as much ink as a new pen would at the moment, I've got a spare I dropped in. I didn't know how new these pens were. I can still use this because I can still just really catch the edges with a part dry pen, and so you put that to one side and get one that gives you much more ink but still keep the partly dry pen. There you go. can see this is a newer pen, because it still gives you some really interesting marks and useful marks. I think there's a look at all that colour just from one pen and water. Literally nothing else. Just trying to catch, pushing down on the heel of the brush this time, so the water isn't flowing out, just to give me some interesting textures. Give it some depth by going behind and under. Just touching the edges, but creating a new texture with the brush. So you've got the texture of the fur, which again it looks like I can go back into, the new different texture of the stone, and the very smooth texture of the wings. And that's what I talk about when I'm talking about texture, is making it interesting, having different interesting marks. So if I use the tip, you can see how much more water floods out. I'm going to just try. Whether this works, I don't know. I'm just going to try and... Oh. Just put spray water on. Look at that, that's really nice. Problem is, it sometimes disrupts the areas you don't want, which I could mask off. Now, I have noticed if I do use a spray or dab off with the tissue, you'll get much more pinks coming out. So that's a good way to make it, the colours ping a little bit more. Let's use the ink I've got on my brush just to give a little bit more depth here. Stand back, pick up some colour from there. So you can see how the colour really can be moved around. Want to use some of this. You can see by just picking it up off the paper, it's much bluer. So obviously the colour's already starting to split in the ink. What it's doing is just picking up blue. So black is not, there's not many very just totally black pigments, or in this case dye, because these are dye-based pens, which means they don't have much light fast properties and will fade. But there's plenty of ways you can solve that if you want to display an image, put behind glass, which offers UV protection, don't put in sunlight. But it's designed as a calligraphy pen, designed to go in a book or that kind of thing. So it doesn't have huge light fast qualities, and that you'll find that with some other inks. So if you are worried about it, just make sure you look for a light fast ink or a pigmented ink. They're usually light fast rather than the dye based, but it's usually the dye based which are the most fun. I think that's it. I'm not sure if I've missed areas, but I'll just keep working when actually it's probably fine by itself. So to celebrate Halloween and the last day of Inktober, this was a bat using the Elegant Writer and a water brush. That's all it needed to be. So I've had this really spooky feeling something's been going on behind me, but I can't see what it is. We've got a workshop next week with Joe Alsop, so join us then. But I think I might have to call someone in.
Who are you going to call?
Gary! Because I'm sure there's been something going on and I don't know what it's about. And being Halloween, you have to be on your best behaviour. So Gary's here to protect me.
I'm going to bust some ghosts.
Go on, bust those ghosts, which I'm sure have been appearing every now and then, knowing Gary has
everybody.
Knowing Gary has the controls. So yeah, I don't know if you say Happy Halloween, do you? But
Yeah,
enjoy your Halloween. It's all part of the fun. Bats aren't the scary little creatures that people make them out to be. They're actually wonderful creatures. And like I said, join us next week for a workshop with Joe Alsop.